Oh, I know that sound. It's time for the Beer News Report. Hi, welcome to the Beer News Report. Cheers. Today I'm drinking a Radler style beer from Stiegl called Zitron. And as you can see from the can, it's lemony. Basically, it's hard lemonade. It's really easy to drink, and on a hot day after a workout, like running a marathon, this would be a great drink. It's sweet, it's cool, it revitalizes the whole body. Of course, you gotta like lemonade, but I think you should definitely check this one out. Cheers. Today's show is going to be about generations. What are the different generations and how do they affect each other? So, whether you're a baby boomer or a millennial, this show is about you. So, grab a beer, sit back, because we're going to talk about generations. Cheers. This is a chart of the generations, the biggest one being called the baby boomers. Why or how did the baby boomer generation get so big, and why don't we have them anymore? Well, after World War II, when all the GIs came home, they got married and started having a family. Within a couple of years, a baby bubble started to form because all these GIs were having babies at the same time, and lots of them. You got to remember, birth control hadn't been developed yet. As you can see from this chart, the baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1965. And you have to remember that this was happening all around the world. All the GIs of the world were coming back from World War II, back to their wives and having babies. But we all have wars all the time. And why aren't there several baby bubbles? Well, this chart shows the baby boom for Australia. And after the boomer period, birth control was developed and the rate of babies dropped dramatically. By 1973, Roe versus Wade happened in the Supreme Court, and now abortions are legal. So even after Vietnam War, there wasn't much of a baby boom. And in 1968, Paul Ehrlich wrote a book called The Population Bomb. And it took a little time for it to come into mainstream, but it ended up selling millions and millions of copies. It predicted the collapse of society because the world couldn't handle all these people, which motivated people to have smaller families. This just didn't affect America. In 1979, China instituted the one-child policy. Having smaller families was gaining political pressure around the world because we all thought that the world couldn't handle so many people. And now I'm about to show you some charts on different generations. Now the dates are hard and fast, and in fact it's hard to find two charts that have the same dates for each generation, but it gives us approximate dates. So take that into consideration when looking at these charts. Cheers. Here's the first chart. The boomers care about health, wealth, and quality. They were born right after World War II, and the US was the main producer in the world. Next is Gen X. They were born between 1965 and 1980. They came out in a showdown with the boomers, and they didn't get recognized for anything. So it made them feel a little mad, right? And so they're kind of anti-everything. They keep themselves busy, and they're a little cynical. Then there's the Gen Y, or what we call the millennials. They grew up in the Reagan era when he was president. He started Star Wars. This is when the internet blossomed and computers were everywhere. And then finally there's Gen Z, and they were the first generation to grow up in a fully digital environment. Hey, if you want to freak out at Gen Z, show him a vinyl record, or if you can still find one, an 8-track tape. They won't know what to do with it. Here's another chart relating to the workforce. It only shows the boomers, Gen X, and the millennials because they're pretty much the only ones making up the workforce. Look at the top part of this chart and notice all the bar graphs. The dark blue is the baby boomers, the red is the Gen X, and the light blue are the millennials. First, there's the executive presence. And of course, baby boomers are going to have the biggest presence there. They've been working the longest. You just don't start out as an executive. You have to start at the bottom and work your way up. The next is revenue generation. Here, the Gen X group reigns supreme, which makes sense because they're the middle managers or the team leads. You go to them to get things done, which is also why they lead in problem solving. Now, we move to adaptability, which again the Gen Xers rule, but that's because they have to satisfy the needs of the boomers with the desires of the millennials. This makes them great at relationship building and collaboration, again as shown from these graphs. We end the top row with cost effectiveness, which the baby boomers control. Now, cost effectiveness is important and may make the difference between your product being a dud or a hit. But if you ask a Gen Xer or a millennial, they'll just say the baby boomers are tightwads. Finally, we end with tech savviness, which is the only area where millennials rule. And this makes sense because the younger generation is always more accepting of new technology than the older generation. I mean, how many times have you had to listen to your grandfather say, "In my day, we had to walk to school in the snow. It was uphill, both going to school and coming home. I didn't get to stay home and play on my computer. Grandparents, right? Cheers. This chart shows us the population of each generation. Now the boomers, let's just round them off to 72 million and consider that some of them are starting to retire. The youngest of the baby boomers is now 57. If the average retirement age is 62, how many boomers are retiring each day? The youngest boomer is 57 years old, and the average age for retirement is 65 years old. Boomers have 72 million people in them. The boomer generation is 18 years long, so 72 million divided by 18 years gives us 4 million boomers each year. 1 year is 365 days. Each year, 4 million boomers retire, so 4 million divided by 365 gives us about 11,000 boomers retiring each day. So that's 11,000 boomers retiring each day, including weekends, on average. How does that affect our economy and the job market? Let's find out. Cheers. This chart shows what percentage each generation is currently working. It's a pretty even split, with the Gen Zs just starting to have come into the workforce. Look how much this changes by 2025, which is only 4 years from now. Millennials and Gen Zs make up 75% of the workforce. There's only 5% of the boomers left, which means the Gen Xers are now the executives. Let's reflect on this. On average, 4 billion boomers will retire each year over the next probably 8 years. So, even if the US economy is at a standstill and no new jobs are created, we will still have to fill 4 million jobs each year. In 2020, the US graduated 3.9 million students from college. So we don't even have enough to fill the boomers leaving, much less the US economy is expanding and making new jobs. Now, let's go back to this chart and look at the populations of each generation. The boomers are leaving and the Gen Zs are replacing them. But there are more boomers than Gen Zs by about 6 million. So how do we fix this? There's two answers. Either we increase our immigration quotas or we make a lot more robots. Actually, now that I think about it, there's three answers, which is that we do both, right? And most likely that's what we're going to do. But what happens if we don't fix this? Well, corporations will have no choice and will have to move to where the skilled workers are. And we've already seen that, right? It used to be that you would go to China, India because of the cheap labor force there. But it's not cheap anymore. But they have focused on education, and now both China and India are producing more engineers than America. So either you immigrate engineers from there or you build factories over there to get your engineers. It's the only choices. Cheers. Finally, I want to talk about what happens when the boomers retire. How does that affect our economy? This chart shows the wealth of each generation. I've included the silent generation as this is the stage where boomers are entering. The silent generation had more homes and more wealth than the boomers, but this has dropped dramatically, and it should be noted that the timeline on this chart is 31 years. You can see that the boomers are starting to drop off on home ownership and their wealth has peaked. So why is this happening? Well, think about it. When you retire, the kids have all grown and moved out. Hopefully they're starting families of their own. You no longer need that 4-bedroom house, so you sell it and get a 2-bedroom condo. Now, a condo is probably in Florida or Texas, as these are states that have low to no income tax. And as a retired person, you want to hang on to your wealth. Next, you have all this money in your IRAs or other retirement accounts and no new money coming in. So you start spending it. Yes, you have Social Security and maybe some interest from bonds or dividend stocks, but that really doesn't cover all the bills. So that's why the wealth is dropping for the boomers. And a reminder, this is happening all over the world at the same time, as most countries had baby boomers at the same time we did. So why isn't there a glut of family homes and why isn't the stock market tanked? Well, those are darn good questions. Let's think about that. Cheers. I can only speculate on these questions, but for homes, it looks like the production of new homes hasn't kept pace with our growing population. Plus the new technology of Airbnb, anyone can go out and rent a home, so now people are buying extra homes and just renting them out on Airbnb. As for the stock market, well, we're still hiring and growing our economy. I think the real driver is interest rates, which are historically low. But what drives interest rates? That's usually inflation. So only time will tell when inflation will reach a point that will drive up interest rates. Until then, companies have cheap money to expand their business and rake in the profits. This will make the stock market continue to go up. I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? Having the stock market go up. The only problem is most Americans aren't invested in the stock market. So they don't get to participate in the growth of our economy, which is partly the reason why we have inequality in wealth, right? It's not the only reason, though. Cheers. Let's recap. Generations are roughly 15 to 18 years long. Of these, the baby boomers are the biggest. Most of the boomers are reaching retirement age, which means more workers are leaving the workforce than are coming in. There are a number of reasons why we didn't have another baby boom, like being birth control, abortions, political pressure to keep families small. And this is happening around the world. Now, baby boomers are starting to retire at a rate of 11,000 per day, including weekends, on average. The baby boomers are the largest generation, and there's a coming lapse in replacement of skilled workers. Someone or something has to replace these workers, whether it be immigrants or robots. Without replacement skilled workforce, companies will have no choice but to build factories in other countries. And it used to be that they would go to China and India for their cheap labor, but now these countries are producing the majority of skilled labor in the whole world. Finally, as boomers retire, they will move into smaller houses like condos, move to some low-tax states, so populations of California and New York should decline, whereas Texas and Florida should go up. As boomers start to live off their savings, their 401ks, their IRAs, there will be pressure on the stock market to go down because the boomers are going to exchange stock for cash. Currently, we haven't seen this as interest rates are historically low and inflation hasn't driven them up. So in the next 10 years, most of the boomers will have retired, and we will see the effects on the job market, housing, and stocks. It should be an interesting decade. Cheers. Well, as you can see, my beer's almost empty. That means we're at the end of the show. If you'd like to contact me, I can be reached at this email address. I hope you had a good time, and I hope you liked the data I provided. If you did, click that like button. Of course, if you want to get notified of a new show, you click that subscribe button and hit the bell icon next to it. This will tell you when I posted a new show. Till then, keep your beer cold and yours is hot. Cheers.